Welcome to Concrete Conversations, the Indian Real Estate Podcast. I'm Yash.
And I'm Akshay, and we're the hosts of the show.
How has the business of real estate development changed? What is the future of residential development in India? Is Indian real estate ready for its next bull run?
To talk about this and more, we have with us an industry veteran and the pioneer of the development management model in India, Mr. Milind Korde. Former managing director of Godrej Properties, Mr. Korde was instrumental in taking the company public. In 2013, he founded Landwise, a development management firm offering end-to-end real estate solutions, which today manages a property portfolio of 5 million square feet.
With over 3 decades of development experience pan-India, Mr. Korde joins us today for an in-depth conversation about the development landscape of Indian real estate.
Mr. Korde, thank you so much for joining us on Concrete Conversations. How are you and how is your day going so far?
Yeah, good. I think, and it's my pleasure to be on your show. And I hope, it's a good conversation we have going forward.
Certainly. So, sir, you've spent over 3 decades in the Indian real estate industry. So, could you tell us a little bit about how you got into it and your journey till date?
Yeah, so I started with Tata Housing way back in 1988. And I guess Tata's was the first name in the corporate sector to get into the real estate space. Then I went on to join Godrej Properties in 1990. I think Godrej was not really thinking of this as a business, but they have a large property at Vikhroli. At some point of time, if and when urban land ceiling, which was constraining development, was repealed, then that property could come up for development. That was way back in 1990. And progressively, one thing led to another, and really real estate started going in a big way when liberalization process started in India, and when foreign direct investment was allowed. I think you had so many players, etc., and development really going to a different scale now. So that's been my sort of journey in real estate.
Right. And we know that now with Landwise, which is the firm that you founded, you work on a development management model. Could you tell us a little bit about this model and how it came into being and what makes it unique?
Yeah, so I think the first time really we used this model was when I was at Godrej, and there was this property at Thane called Eden Woods, and it was being developed by a company called Habitat Developers, which was a family kind of concern and really doing a good job. But I think that project was a little far too ahead of its times in terms of design and costs, and also marketing reach for them. And then they looked around for a partner, and that's how really the development management model came into being, where we stepped in from Godrej, leveraging the strong brand name to create the whole development platform and take that development forward.
Right.
I think that was the genesis of the model, and then now I think it is used very sort of actively in the real estate space, because it's a asset light model where you leverage your professional strengths of bringing expertise of development. I believe at Ananta we do that because there are actually 3 pieces to a development. One is the landowner. The other is somebody like us who provides the expertise for development, and the third piece is the fund provider, which is a very important constituent because of the fact that the scale of projects has increased significantly in terms of size and complexity, etc.
Right.
So I think if all these three parties play their role, then projects can be executed very smoothly. And that's the principle behind starting this model.
So just to draw the distinction, maybe for the benefit of our audience, like you said, this is an asset light model. And how would you characterize this as being different from a JVA, for example?
And just to clarify, sir, before you answer that, for our listeners, a JVA, also interchangeably known as a JDA, stands for a joint venture agreement or a joint development agreement.
So, in a typical JDA model, where land is either paid for in terms of a certain percentage, where, say, for example, if you have a 50-50 JDA, then 50% of the land is contributed by the partner as his contribution towards land, and then the rest of the funding is provided either by way of a loan or by way of further equity, etc. And then the JDA is operationalized.
Right.
So typically, it starts with the concept that land has a cost. But in a typical DM model or the asset light model, the land becomes a derived cost. It does not have an assumed value, but it has a derived value in the sense that it comes out as a percentage of a profit or a percentage of revenue of the top line, so that the landowner derives value from his contribution towards the project, that is the land. So I think that is the distinction. So you don't start off with taking a value for the land,
Right.
but you take off, in terms of as the project progresses and the selling price less costs are sort of gives you the contribution. Or in certain cases, you just put it as a percentage of the top line so that you have enough to pay for the cost and other, expenses for the project. I think that is the differentiation between a typical JDA model and development model under the development management agreement.
Right.
And when it comes to the three parties that you talked about in this development management model, does this, and also how does this model lend itself to better cooperation and cohesiveness, or better alignment to a single objective between the developer, the landowner, and the institution backing the funding?
Yeah, I think in a typical developer's model where the land is transferred, rights are transferred to the land to the developer, and the fund provider also transfers the funds. The control is generally exercised only by the developer. I think in this kind of a model where particularly large lands or lands which belong to corporates, etc., where they would not like to lose of control of their asset for various purposes. One can find ways to ensure that the structure is put in place in such a manner that the service provider, that is in this case Ananta, as we try to take this forward, ensures that everybody's interests are aligned to the common interest of giving the space to the end consumer on time, and everybody in the value chain earns their expected return. That is, the landowner gets the rightful amount for his land, the fund provider gets the right IRR, and the consumer or the customer, as we know, who is the most important constituent in this, gets the space on time. The focus is on ensuring that working capital turns.
Right.
That is, that you would turn around projects very quickly with very low capital, and then your returns are actually are much better than what you would expect from a typical development model.
Right.
So I think it takes away that speculation from real estate transactions.
Understood.
So recently we've seen, the maybe not trend, but the concept of self-redevelopment become a little more popular. So given what you said about, this model providing more control to the landowners, or in this case, a society, how do you think that these models could tie in with something like self-redevelopment?
Yeah, I think once you have professional expertise of how to do it, and in pre-development there is a fear psychosis that once you leave your house or home, you may not be able to come back in time, or
Right.
you may not get it at all.
Hmm.
I think if you provide the tools of how to do it, the fund provider also then sort of is happy that there is somebody who is helping to ensure that the project is delivered in time.
Right.
Then the self redevelopment works well. I think because the underlying asset is available, in the sense the land or whatever you call it, which is the security for the project, and you bring in the expertise and you bring in the funds, all of that ties together to give a positive outcome.
Right.
There are large landowners who have special needs, or there may be a corporate who would want to build some of their land which is underutilized, or there could be a fund who is really, looking at or redevelop certain assets of theirs to ensure that their IRRs and their returns are maximized. I
Right.
think we are trying to target those kind of developers.
Right.
Certainly. And thinking about this, especially with what you just said about funds looking to redevelop some of their assets to improve the IRR, could you maybe highlight, either through specific examples or through any case studies that you may know of, what tangible impacts have the foreign fund partnerships with either landowners or developers had in Indian real estate?
Well, I can take the Ananta example now, where we are developing a property in Kalyani Nagar in Pune, where the land is being provided by a landowner, and we are providing the expertise of developing the land to him, and he is the developer.
Hmm.
And Brookfield, who wanted to, get about 2 million square feet built to be sort of leased out to their client, has tied up with the landowner, and we sort of ensure that the development is delivered in time, and both Brookfield and the landowner make the requisite return.
Right.
I think is these are the kind of models which are in sort of vogue at the moment, and in the normal course of things, it would have been with a developer, and they would have, had to wait for the development to happen. But in this case, it's a build to suit, and so we have a three-party arrangement basically, where the developer has a vision, in this case being the landowner, and Brookfield requires the asset to be delivered in a particular time frame, and it's a particular design which would be suitable to be leased out to their clients, etc. And we ensure that we bring in that expertise, that both of these entities' objectives are met.
Following up to that, sir, I think what's critical here that you highlighted is that the objectives of all three parties should be achieved. Could you maybe shed light on some of the development pressures that you face, that you've observed, that one has to work around in order to achieve these objectives? And also maybe how they've changed with time?
I think what is being observed is that state governments and even the central government, to a large extent, is making all possible changes in laws to ensure that developments run smoothly, because governments have understood that if we have to move to the status of a developed economy, it is very important that physical assets are developed quickly,
Right.
whether it is real estate, infrastructure, etc. And that is the mindset which is driving things forward. And I think there are changes in the land laws, etc., happening at a fast pace. I think the challenge is also being that land laws being in the concurrent list in the constitution, both central and the state government make the laws. But RERA also has been a game changer.
Right.
I think when regulation came in the telecom sector, the sector just exploded in terms of growth. And I think a similar kind of thing is happening in the real estate sector. In Maharashtra, they have just introduced uniform development control regulation for all municipalities in Maharashtra. Earlier, every municipality had a different development control regulation, in the sense that Mumbai would be different from Pune. But now you have a uniform kind of regulation, which would simplify things going forward. So these kind of changes are taking place, and I think the very important thing to do here is to ensure that projects are turned around very quickly so that customer confidence is very high,
Right.
and that will ensure that developments will progress at a fast pace, and also take away some of the ambiguity in the sector.
And do you also feel that perhaps, the advent of a unified development control regulation also gives developers the opportunity to compete in micro markets that are not their home market, even if not on a national level, but even across a single state?
Yeah, so at least in Maharashtra, they have a level playing field now.
Right.
Maybe the development control regulation in a place like Bangalore will be different. Then there are challenges with language, where you everything happens in the language of that state. So those challenges are there, but I think we are now getting to because of RERA, the fact that developers have to now put everything on a website, and
Right.
the selling happens only when you have all the approvals, putting the money in escrow before it is dispersed for the project.
So it highlights transparency as well as uniformity.
Yeah, I think that's what happens. If you have regulation and you follow it, and it keeps on getting refined, then there is a lot of standardization.
Right.
Also, the confidence of, say, foreign funds like to invest into India goes up that much. Whether it is in the residential segment, then there is the office segment, large part of it being the outsourced IT office space, and that business is coming to India. That requirement is extremely high. I think going forward, there is warehousing, logistics, student housing, co-working, co-living, etc.
Right.
So I think the market size is huge. I think regulation and standardization will lead to a different kind of growth opportunity in this sector.
Understood.
Sir, just to, I believe you had mentioned, new verticals arising out of the standardization that we're seeing. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on affordable housing in India. We're starting to see a lot of, momentum in that direction, both from the demand side and also to some extent from the developer side. There's a lot of interest. So what are your thoughts on the affordable housing market in India going forward to the next decade?
I think it's as government spending on infrastructure gathers momentum, and you have because of the road network, the power supply, the water supply, etc. Also, the fact that that there is also a focus on the social infrastructure, such as schools, colleges, hospitals, etc.
Right.
I think the key is the infrastructure in terms of making a success out of affordable housing.
Right.
And then I think some of the technological changes in the sector using prefab, the Maivam, Formberg, etc. Projects can be delivered quickly. So I think these are some of the key elements. But I think it is, looking at the size of the population, and most of the population being young and their incomes not being very high. When you are young, it's a natural this thing,
Right.
where this sector will play an important role.
Right. So just to follow up on that, suppose, like you said, infrastructure is a really important part of all of this. Is that also a reason we're seeing traction on concepts like townships?
Yeah, I think most states have a township policy where you can be almost like the local authority and you provide everything, whether it is housing and the social infrastructure, etc. Commercial also has a certain part of the overall development.
Right.
And then you have incentives of tax breaks and your higher FSI, etc. given, so that projects are have that necessary support to ensure that they are profitable. So I think all that is definitely happening, and I'm sure going forward you will see a lot of these township kind of projects coming up in different parts of the country.
Right. Do you feel like historically there has been, and maybe even presently there is, or maybe now it's reducing, but there has been a visible gap between what the market demands and what regulatory incentives are geared towards? Just to give you an example, if you look at the Mumbai micro market, there you'll see a large supply of high-end luxury residential real estate. But then again, there's a lot of government incentives for townships or for affordable housing.
I think in the Mumbai market there is a lot of incentives now being provided, particularly FSI, which was used to be historically low, has now come to a good level, particularly in different areas, and that's a very good thing because certain areas requires development to be controlled, and certain areas, development should be allowed, vertically, so with higher FSI. I think that is happening now, and I think the prices are still a little high in Mumbai. But I don't think there is a lot of gap now in what the developers' expectations are, and what are being provided by the government. There could be some specific instances, but largely I think there is a lot of changes, and it's moving in the right direction.
Right. And, speaking of where the market could be heading in light of all the changes and development models we've already discussed today in our conversation, are there any takeaways or do's and don'ts, either from personal experience or from case studies that you have witnessed for developers who may be planning their growth strategy going forward?
Yeah, I think the mantra is, I think, to ensure that to turn around projects very quickly and not speculate, in the sense that if a project is selling, you keep on selling rather than speculate on higher prices. Easier said than done because
Hmm.
costs keep on changing and going high, and expectations, on even if there are fixed contracts, from the contractor or from the vendors remain that if there are any changes, you keep on paying that, and if your price is fixed, then you are a little constrained there. So I think turning around projects quickly is going to be a very important driver. But I guess I think that is also happening now. Yeah, most people are, most developers are ensuring that projects are done and turned around quickly. But we are through this pandemic. Surprisingly, the demand for real estate has been quite good, and particularly for gated communities and large projects. So I think going forward, we may look at a good cycle in real estate,
Right.
because we've really been in a very bearish phase for the last several years. I think usually cycles last for 5 to 10 years, a weak cycle. But this cycle has just been very weak for a very long time. But surprisingly, as I said, in the pandemic, it's done well. And I think we are now headed for a good growth period in the sector.
Certainly.
So just to continue on this theme, like you said, now there could be growth coming. Do you think that all the pieces kind of from the regulatory and the structure side are now in place? We've had RERA come in. We've had the profession of brokerage becoming more formal. We've had, like you said, standardization of development control regulations, which has been coupled with people realizing their own demand for real estate during the pandemic. So do you think that the pieces are now in place for a sustained push for real estate to grow in a more corporate and organized way?
Yeah, I think the important thing is capital in the sector. I think with this standardization, RERA, etc., I think when the confidence of the fund providers go on a different level, you would see a huge growth in the sector, because if laws are ambiguous, there is no
Right.
regulation, there is no standardization, it is very difficult to lend. and then your lending happens only to a few
Hmm.
branded players or people who have a track record. But I think with these changes,
Right.
capital should be made available a little more easier than what it was before. So I think with those kind of changes, confidence going up, capital being made available, definitely there is a huge bull cycle. I would think for the sector coming up. Not
Right.
necessarily in terms of prices, but definitely in terms of volume.
Right.
And speaking of, the rationalization and standardization across the market, and of foreign capital being invested in projects here in India, traditionally we have seen a large chunk of foreign capital being invested in commercial real estate. We're talking about office spaces and business parks, etc. As market confidence continues to grow and as regulations continue to evolve, do you feel that there is capacity for foreign capital to be invested in even residential projects, or even for new models to emerge, like the build and lease model, which is traditionally has existed for commercial real estate? Maybe that can come into the residential space as well.
In the home buying, it is usually homes are sold by providing mortgages, etc.
Right.
But I think going forward, I see also the fact, because of the demographics of the country, that a lot of rental housing should come up, because also people are now not averse to moving from a city to another city or a state for a job. And
Right.
then it is basically rental housing, if it is available as a standardized kind of piece, where you have the basic things like wardrobes, and it's fitted out rather, and services are available in the building, such as coffee shops or a gym, laundromats, etc. That would really be an important driver for some foreign funds to participate in residential REITs.
Right.
Right now, most of the REITs are directed towards your commercial real estate. So I think that would be an important factor. Also, student housing, co-working, co-living,
Hmm.
and also there is data centers, warehousing. There are a lot of opportunities in different segments now.
So, like you said, we've had a bit of a reset now. People are now more open to moving. The kind of lens through which we viewed traditionally, office and residential real estate has changed a little bit in the last year or so. What would you say the impact of all of this is on something like mixed use development and real estate? Is that something that could be more important and more crucial going forward to distribute all these, services and all that we use?
Yeah, I think mixed use is very important from the point of view of quality of living. From the if you stay close to your place of work, and then you can get your other daily needs, etc.
Right.
Available close by. I think typically these kind of developments ensure that people don't have to travel long distances, and there is efficiency in the work environment, and also you can balance your life in terms of living close by and ensuring you give your time to your family. So
Right.
I think mixed use development serve that kind of a purpose, and those kind of projects are quite popular.
Hmm.
But I think the challenges are consolidation of land, and because land is very fragmented in India.
So, in our conversation today, we've talked about infrastructure, we've talked about regulation. Could we maybe highlight a few of the internal or external factors that influence certain micro markets to become more active than others for real estate development?
Yeah, now if you look at what is happening in the city of Mumbai, for example, you have the coastal road project, or you have the Sivri Nava Seva link. So Mumbai, the prices were high because most developments, if you study Bangalore, Pune, Chennai, they are sort of radial, in the sense that you have the city can expand by way of your outer ring roads, etc.
Yeah.
But Mumbai basically was growing in one direction. You have South Mumbai, which had lot of importance. But just look at the fact that, once you had the Worli Bandra sea link and BKC and most of the commercials then moved northwards. I think now, if you look at South Mumbai and you look at North Mumbai like Bandra and even
Right.
places like Juhu and Andheri, the prices are quite similar. But the coastal road is going to be a big game changer,
Yeah.
and also you can develop a lot of housing along the Mumbai Pune Expressway, or once you have the Sivri Nava Seva link done, then you have almost the identical city on the other side of that road, or bridge rather.
Right.
The airport coming up at Panvel. So New Bombay, Panvel, and even Pune will be almost like a satellite town of Mumbai. So I think all these infrastructure changes ensure that prices are maintained at an optimum level, and there is no undue weightage to a certain area.
Hmm.
Although certain buildings and certain developments will remain iconic, and they will have those high prices due to locational advantages like the sea, or or those kind of, or being having certain status because of neighborhoods, etc.
Hmm.
But largely, I think prices would get rationalized because of infrastructure, and you will see growth happening in different areas.
Right.
Understood. Sir, I think with this, we've come to the end of our conversation with you today. But I just wanted to thank you once again for your time and for your insights. I think it's safe to say we really enjoyed this conversation, and it was both very informative as well as eye opening.
Definitely. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, yes. Okay, Akshay. Thank you. Thank you for having me on your show.
If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to follow Concrete Conversations on Instagram to know more about upcoming episodes and for some behind the scenes content.
For more deep dives into the world of Indian real estate, stay tuned for more concrete conversations.